Hello, my name is Prior Chad, and I'm the vicar here at St. Augustine's Episcopal Parish in Tempe, Arizona. The following sermon was delivered on November 8th, 2015, and the primary context for this sermon have to do with the reading from the Hebrew Scriptures, which was the end of the book of Ruth, and the story of Ruth and Naomi, her mother-in-law. I also focus on the gospel from the Gospel of Mark, which was the story of the poor widow and her meager contribution to the temple treasury. And I use these two stories to highlight what's often overlooked in our tradition, which is the alternative communities and the alternative economies at play among the poor and the marginalized, and particularly among women throughout history, and especially in antiquity. I hope that this sermon gives you an opportunity to reflect upon the ways in which God's economy differs from the economy of the mainstream. And I hope that you are able to attune to that economy more fully and in deeper ways. Blessings upon you.
For the last couple of 100 years, we have loved to hear stories about what happens behind the scenes, out of the public eye, in the lives of people to whom we can relate, who seem more or less realistic, if not below us in class or social location. Think of the great 19th century novels we all read in school by authors like Charles Dickens, Leo Tolstoy, Mark Twain. These stories offer us windows into the worlds of characters who traverse back alleys or backwoods, who struggle through life building character and testing their moral compasses. Popular movies and television continue to showcase the dynamics of life on the underside of culture. Think of mysteries and crime dramas that take investigators off the beaten path, or shows like Downton Abbey that give us a view of what happens downstairs among the inconsequential lives of the servant class. This kind of literary realism hasn't always been prevalent in the stories we share as a culture. In the classical world, for example, stories were largely meant to depict an ideal, to show life as it should be, rather than life as it is. They were not so much concerned with the audience relating to the plights of everyday characters. They sought to hold up sets of values worthy of emulation through the lives and actions of extraordinary protagonists. The stories we find in the Bible, in the Hebrew Scriptures and in the New Testament, share more qualities with classical literature than with the literary realism to which we are accustomed. We come away from these stories with a particular view of life as it should be, with values and ideals clarified. But there's something else going on in the biblical stories as well, and it has to do with the perspective from which they're told. While utilizing literary conventions of the classical era, these stories originate from the margins of culture, not from its centers of power. And while the values and ideals in biblical stories are colored by the values and ideals held up in the dominant culture, they ultimately point to an alternative set of values and challenges the dominant culture's central assumptions. I think that our own culture's love of literary realism, of stories told from the perspectives of everyday people and the disenfranchised, equips us with eyes to see what is often overlooked in biblical stories. That is, to see the remnants within these stories of their origins at the margins of society. Two stories where these remnants are especially visible are found in our readings this morning from the book of Ruth and from the Gospel of Mark. Embedded within each of these stories, we find hints of the world's oldest set of alternative values and methods. Those that operate within the relationships between mothers and daughters, sisters and aunts, nieces and grandmothers. The values and methods operating within a community of women. It's crucial for us to remember as we listen to these stories that a community of women operates at the margins of society as an alternative to the dominant culture because most women, in and of themselves, had no rights or real power in antiquity. If a woman was lucky enough to be a wife, rather than a prostitute or a slave, she was the property of her husband. Her place in the world facilitated by her relationship to a man. And if that husband up and died, and she had no grown son to take her in, her access to resources and security was greatly in danger. This is the circumstance in which the women in our stories this morning find themselves. They are widows. They navigate society from the margins. Their access to the cultural mainstream, to its resources and security, cut off by the death of their husbands. But in the margins, they operate according to an alternative to the economy that drives the mainstream. They operate within an economy of the disenfranchised. The story of Naomi and Ruth gives the clearest view of this alternative economy. Naomi is Ruth's mother-in-law, and they are both widows who have traveled together from Moab, where their husbands died, to Bethlehem, where Naomi is from. As we heard in this morning's lesson, Naomi sets about seeking some security for Ruth and for herself. And after some coaching on how to navigate a set of rather obscure customs from a risky and extremely vulnerable position, Ruth is successfully married to a relative of Naomi's dead husband and bears a son, thereby securing security and well-being for both of them. It's at this point, at the happy conclusion to the story, that we get a glimpse of the alternative economy at work within a community of women. The story describes that the women of the neighborhood gather around Naomi, Ruth, and the baby, and declare what these events mean. The women declare that God did not abandon Naomi to her bitter lot, leaving her destitute and powerless, but that through one unlikely resource, her Moabite daughter-in-law, God has brought about this pleasant outcome. Furthermore, it is the community of women who name the baby, giving him the name Obed, which means to serve or servant. Might this name be a kind of challenge to the status quo? A claim that God's own power is used to serve the interests of widows who live at the margins of society, rather than the interests of the powerful who live in the mainstream. With this view of God's alternative economy in place, let us look at the scene depicted in today's gospel. Here we see Jesus teaching in the temple courts, calling people to beware of those who seem to have it made in the cultural and religious mainstream. The scribes, Jesus says, derive power and influence for themselves by managing appearances and by cheating widows who are not permitted to handle handle their own affairs out of what little they have. Paired with this teaching in Mark's Gospel is a visit to the temple treasury by one such poor widow. Jesus witnesses this widow put in a meager gift of 2 small copper coins and tells his disciples that her small gift was worth more than everything else that was put in, because it was all she had to live on. In this pairing of Jesus' teaching about the scribes with the gift of the poor widow, I think we can see an alternative economy similar to that which we saw operating in the story of Naomi and Ruth. The poor widow operates at the margins of society with few resources. It's likely, given the context, that a scribe oversees her financial affairs and denies her access to further resources. But these 2 copper coins are hers. They are in her hand. They are at her disposal. She is free to do with them whatever she pleases. And she chooses to give them to God as an act of resistance, as a declaration that she puts her trust in God and God's power to redeem her life from injustice and oppression. She acts in harmony with the community of women from the book of Ruth, who declared that God's resources serve the interests of the poor and disenfranchised. And when Jesus witnesses her actions, he declares that her small gift is of greater value. It has contributed more to God's resources than all the other large gifts put together. God's alternative economy, that which operates among communities on the margins of society, cannot be measured in monetary terms. It runs on life. Life that flows from us to God and from God to us. This is the kind of economy that we are building here at St. Augustine's. We are a community that functions differently than the cultural mainstream. Here, we value human flourishing across generations in body, mind, and soul. Here we see and make meaning from that which is cast off and regarded as worthless in our consumer culture. Things like ritual and mystery, like sacrifice and vulnerability in community, like service to the least of these, like the simple sharing of bread and wine as means by which God meets us where we are. It's often tempting to think that a church like ours, with its valuable location near ASU and its beautiful, if not rapidly aging facility, is flowing confidently down the cultural mainstream with ample resources at its disposal to do what it's called to do. But the truth is that we're not. We are navigating culture from the margins, and our life together relies on what we each bring to it. But like the widows in our stories, and like the community of women, we trust God to do wonders, to change the world with what we have to give. We have seen God bringing about amazing things through our community, healing the brokenhearted, giving the lonely a place to call home, raising up leaders for the wider church, creating an environment where our children can feel welcome to explore their relationship to God with loving guidance and support. This is God's alternative economy at work in our midst, and it runs on the life we share with God and with each other. Let us not take it for granted. Let us give from our lives what we have to give, and let us receive from God's life the wonders God has in store. Amen.